Patch 7.1 released recently with new content to sink your teeth into, and I hope you're having a great time with it. This video is spoiler free for all of that content though, because that's not what I want to talk about today. As with every major patch, we received a major swathe of balance adjustments to most of the game's 21 jobs, and with the brand new first Ultimate in close to 2 years releasing next week, we can view some of them in the lens of that upcoming challenge, because there is actually quite a lot to talk about here. I think this is also a good time to have a discussion on balancing now that we have an entire raid tier behind us and have seen the jobs scale as players obtain gear and groups optimize the fights to hell, pushing every inch they can from the previous state of the game's balance. So today I'll be asking, did your job get good changes in patch 7.1? And more than that, is the direction the job design team take indicative of positive change next expansion? We'll take a look at tanks first, starting with Paladin. Paladin was in a pretty solid spot already thanks to the incredible utility it provides through intervention and cover, the ability to peel easily out of melee range without loss, as well as its bonus group mitigation in the form of passage of arms, and its recovery potential as well. It essentially brought everything to the table except damage, and it wasn't like it was awful in that field either, just by no means the best in class. Paladin received an extended range on cover, from 10 yalms to 20, a lower unlock level for Intervene, their gap closer, meaning that you'll now have access to it in UCOB and OO, which is definitely a nice piece of quality of life, and lastly, Hallowed Ground will have its effects apply earlier. The developers had this to say about it. The required level to learn Intervene has been lowered to better align with the movement abilities of other tank jobs. We've also increased the effective range of cover to improve ease of use. So yeah, balance-wise it's identical, no changes, but it did receive 2 nice pieces of quality of life that are worth discussing. The cover change is good. A couple of expansions back, the skill was brokenly strong and was completely gutted, leaving it in a state that was occasionally situationally valuable in progression and barely pressed elsewhere. So whilst this change is a positive, I don't think this is going to drastically increase its usage. The Hallowed Ground change is fantastic once again. The delay in activation to that ability that was slower than every other tank invuln was annoying to play around and perplexing that it remained for as many years as it did. So yeah, good change. Warrior also received very little in the way of meaningful changes. Beforehand it was the king of dungeons, with so much self-heal that scholars around the world were enviously shaking their heads at it. Easy to play, versatile, with a good on-demand burst. As the tier went on, it fell a tiny bit behind Paladin in terms of damage at pretty much every percentile, but that doesn't really reduce the value that it provided. For Warrior, Chaotic Cyclone will now have its hit detection trigger earlier, very nice, and the effects of Holmgang will also trigger earlier. But there was also a third buff, or rather a bug fix actually, hidden in the fixed issues that I genuinely had no idea was even a thing in the first place. Apparently in 7.1, they have fixed an issue where using the Warrior PvE action Thrill of Battle, wherein its increased healing potency effect did not apply to Bloodwetting or Nascent Flash. Cool. Now let's move on to the 2 tanks that have interesting alterations. Dark Knight was in a solid enough spot beforehand. Despite being a job that was plagued with a handful of divisive design decisions, I think the number of videos complaining about it this expansion has kind of been the proof of the pudding in that regard. It did, despite that, have the damage potential to pull ahead of the other tanks with high ends of optimization, as well as the increased stats that the gear provided, and it did just that as the tier went on, which is something that often happens in a raid tier as a note, with it becoming the highest damaging tank at upper percentiles. Despite those awkward inconveniences, it was also fairly unique with its split short mitigation that made it an excellent support to allies during major hits. Dark Mind now also reduces physical damage taken by 10%, the effects of Living Dead will apply earlier, the healing potency for Abyssal Drain has increased from 200 to 500, Carve and Spit will now additionally restore HP 2 with a potency of 500, meaning that both shared actions on that cooldown are now OGCD heals with their damage, Blood Spiller gains 20 potency going from 580 to 600, Scarlet Delirium, Comeuppance and Torcleaver all also gain 20 apiece, going to 620, 720 and 820 respectively. Lastly, Dark Missionary is now obtained at 66 instead of 76, and will additionally reduce physical damage taken by 5%. The developers said this: the required level to learn Dark Missionary has been lowered to better align it with the defensive party utilities of other tank jobs. To improve survivability when taking damage from large groups of mobs, the cure potency of Abyssal Drain has been increased. Moreover, the additional effect that it restores own HP has been added to its single target counterpart, Carve and Spit. Lastly, to address disparities in physical defense among tank jobs, the abilities Dark Mind and Dark Missionary will now also reduce physical damage taken. So this is interesting. Dark Knight is likely going to pull ahead at most, if not all, percentiles now, easily, honestly, making it categorically the best tank in terms of damage, even for those that aren't aiming to play at a solid level of optimization. Their damage buffs aren't massive, but I can imagine this will end up being anywhere from a 0.5 to a 1% damage increase overall. They didn't need it, but they got treated right anyway. It's actually in the healing and mitigation changes that I'm more interested though. Firstly, unlocking Dark Missionary at an earlier level is great for Yukop and Uwu, where it was the only tank that didn't offer a secondary raid mitigation, and is a change they really needed. I also feel positively on the adjustments to both Dark Mind and Dark Missionary. Well, the Dark Mind one is slightly divisive, but I do think it's good on the whole. I believe that in a world where firstly, Dark Knight is the only tank personal mitigation with a failure state, and secondly, a world where the two tank group mitigations are Big Heal and Shield and Magic Mitigation, these changes are actually both good and fair. I'd probably feel differently if Paladin and Warrior's AoE mitigations were physical damage reductions, giving them some kind of parity and situational viability, but now these mitigations will at least provide some value when pressed, even when fight design punishes them or the timing isn't carefully considered. Crazily enough, Dark Mind is really strong now compared to Camouflage, Thrill of Battle, and Bulwark, its equitable cooldowns, simply due to it still being a 60-second cooldown and able to gain value on every buster or auto attack. It's actually just the best of the pack now in my opinion, without any kind of debate. The Living Dead thing seems to just be across the board on all tanks. They've made it harder to whiff your invuln, and I don't have too much else to say about that. Carve and Spit healing is nice to have too. Dark Knight is in a really strong position this patch. I'm a little surprised to see not even a singular mention of the drastically reduced mana the job possesses though, especially considering that one of their short defensives, the Blackest Night, relies on it. Last, we come to Gunbreaker. Gunbreaker had high damage, often equaling or being a little bit behind Dark Knight, and also possessed what I believe is one of the strongest 2-minute defensives in Great Nebula, which provided bonus max HP and also had a pretty engaging DPS rotation. For their actual changes, Aurora gains 100 healing potency, going from 200 to 300. Super Bolide gets the same earlier applications as other invulns, and now no longer reduces HP to 1, instead dropping to 50%. Heart of Light now also reduces physical damage by 5%. Hypervelocity receives a 20 potency damage nerf, and Double Down now only costs 1 cartridge instead of 2. The devs explained by saying, the cartridge cost of Double Down has been reduced to improve ease of use. Because this cost reduction allows for greater use of Burst Strike and Hypervelocity, we've chosen to reduce the potency on the latter. That said, Gunbreaker will still see an overall increase in their DPS. To improve Gunbreaker's survivability, we've increased the cure potency of Aurora. Moreover, to address disparities in physical defense among tank jobs, Heart of Light will now also reduce physical damage taken. The Heart of Light buff was made to have parity with the new Dark Knight changes, and makes total sense, and as far as I'm concerned is a good thing for the same reasons that I mentioned there. Aurora's nice enough too. I didn't really feel like it was needed as such, but we'll take free heals where we can get them. The Super Bolide buff is weird though. We didn't need this. I wonder if this is partly implemented to deal with some annoying mechanic that goes through invuln and deals negligible damage in the ultimate, to which I am specifically referring to the dragon heads that Shiva uses, but I suppose my guess is that it's more likely that this was just another ease of use adjustment. I suppose it nerfs those guys that have super bolide and then remove buff immediately macros, but those stopped being funny day 2 of Shadowbringers. I'm not really sure what to say about this, honestly. I don't think we really needed it. It's not harmful to provide it, but I'm just not sure why this was a point of attack for the development team. I think by far the biggest change is that to Double Down though, where Gunbreaker now only needs 1 cartridge to use it. Why is it called Double Down still? It should just be called Down. It's going to be easier to use now, especially when coming out of downtime, which makes it significantly simpler to perform on in ultimate encounters. I know that this was somewhat of a pain point in both DSR and top, and Gunbreaker cartridges will be easier than ever to manage on a macro level. I know Double Down requiring 2 carts has been a fairly persistent complaint that a niche section of the player base had, so I guess their complaints have now officially been heard. But for me personally, I'm not into this for a completely different reason. I prefer it when resource jobs have multiple ways to spend those resources, and that those multiple ways require different levels of investment. To me, managing that is fun. So having everything be a flat out requirement of 1 cartridge feels a bit lackluster than what came before. Numbers wise though, even if hypervelocity is reducing in potency, this is actually a damage buff. The small hit hypervelocity of taking is to offset the large gain that comes from providing you what is essentially +1 ammo every minute from not needing to spend it on Double Down, and once all is said and done, it still ends up an overall win for the job. Before we move on to healers, I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by Marvel Strike Force. Marvel Strike Force brings the Marvel Universe to life in a dynamic squad-based RPG where players assemble teams of Marvel characters to participate in strategic, epic combat with limitless combinations and possibilities. If you use my link in the description, you can download the game for free. Marvel Strike Force is a strategy RPG, including a plethora of both PvE and PvP game modes with wide character customization, and a very friendly new player experience with up to 17 total characters unlocked in the first month. You can experience the campaigns, Blitz, the arena, alongside weekly Alliance wars, raids, and the PvP tournament Cosmic Crucible. Honestly, for me, I'm a big fan of turn-based combat, so problem-solving the PvE challenges did quite a lot for me personally. Throughout November, there are a number of free character giveaways as well as a brand new PvE game mode called Battle World. New characters are constantly being added, including Blade, the brand new addition to the collectible team. To celebrate Halloween, players can use the code Halloween to get their free 100 shards for Zombie Iron Man, 600,000 gold, and 480 L2 training modules. Remember to use my link or scan my QR code to download the game. Thank you so much once again for sponsoring this video. Healers are the next role we're going to look at, but before we delve into the jobs, a role action actually got altered a little bit here. Asuna is now an instant cast rather than a half cast. The developers cite ease of use as the reasoning. I suppose I can see it. It certainly makes it hard to fail those last second cleanses, just like the ones at the end of Living Liquid in the Epic of Alexander, so my expectation is that this isn't related to Futures Rewritten at all, instead just being a general please stop failing to use this fix. Maybe those ice debuffs from Shiva will see a comeback in a big way. White Mage in terms of balance was not in a good position coming into patch 7.1. It still plays fine, it's fun, and you can clear all content on it, but it was so universally behind its direct competitor Astro in both overall damage contribution and mitigation potential that it felt like you were fighting for reasons to rationalize its pick in higher end groups. So what I was hoping for coming into the update was a nice solid bump in its damage to at least place it on the same playing field as its co-regen healer. Holy and Holy 3 receive some lovely quality of life with their cast time reducing from 2.5 to 1.5 seconds. Asylum had a slight VFX change to make it more clear exactly where it will be covering. Glare 3 received a 10 potency gain, Afflatus Misery gained 40 potency, and Divine Caress doubled in range from 50 yards to 30. So these changes are all well and good. This is exactly what I wanted to see. It is definitely a step in the right direction. White Mage got some nice quality of life in their AoE, and Divine Caress's weirdly small range compared to the kits of other healers, and a nice little infusion of additional damage on both their filler and burst hits. The problem? It's looking like a 5 to 600 DPS buff roughly, and the gulf between those jobs in full uptime encounters can easily pass the 2000 mark. Even in downtime, where White Mage shines due to being able to generate lilies for free, it's still significantly behind. It really needed more, and I hope that next patch it receives it. Astra received a change which was purely quality of life, though very welcome. Gravity and Gravity 2 get larger, going from 5 yards to 8 yards in size. This is especially nice in dawntrail dungeons because Square Enix have developed a consistent habit of putting together 1 or 2 very large mobs with a number of smaller ones for trash packs. In some ways this is pretty nice, but for bouncing AoE attacks with small ranges, like the Gravity series for example, it can be exceptionally frustrating to struggle to even hit the full pack. Astra didn't need anything else, because it's already in a powerful position balance-wise, and White Mage was not buffed to pose any real competition. When it comes to Scholar, we did not see any damage changes whatsoever. Instead, there were changes to the job's mana economy, as well as a few healing buffs. Firstly, Embrace and the Seraph version, Seraphic Veil, gained a healing potency buff from 150 to 180. We also saw MP cost reductions on almost all of the job's suite of healing in the form of their shields. So there were MP cost reductions to Adloquium, Succor, Consultation, Manifestation, and Secession. All of those, that entire suite of both single target and AoE shields, dropped from 1000 mana to 900 mana cost each. The team said this about it: the MP cost of area of effect healing actions has been reduced to help improve mana management. Furthermore, as noted on the lodestone, the actions Embrace and Seraphic Veil were incorrectly set to a cure potency of 150. As a little side note, this was a known bug, and Summoner also had a similar bug going on, and it seems that now both of those have been fixed in 7.1. Despite their descriptions stating a potency of 180, after careful consideration we've determined that a potency of 180 would not disrupt the game balance and have therefore increased their cure potency to match their descriptions. Scholar was also a very powerful job, much like Astrologian. It didn't have quite the gap between it that White Mage and Astro have, that being between Scholar and Sage, but Scholar was still absolutely the strongest shield healer to bring in any kind of optimized fight, or even for progression just to its shielding potential. But now, it's easier to spam shields than ever before without running dry on MP, and I imagine that the change has been done maybe partially for the upcoming Futures Rewritten Ultimate, but more than that, I believe the change has been made to shield healers on the whole in order to provide some sense of parity in terms of mana management and cost between the shield healers and the regen healers, because the way things stand before this is that it is a lot easier to manage your mana and keep it healthy on regen healers than it is to do the same on shield healers. So I feel that the changes here have been made to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. Scholar wasn't the only shield healer to receive adjustments though, because Sage got a batch as well. Firstly, Numa, Toxicon 2 and Dosis received damage buffs. All of them go from 360 potency to 370 potency, so there's a 10 potency gain there. Philosophia also received range buffs, just like the White Mage range buffs we saw earlier, increasing from 20 yards to 30 yards. There were also a whole slew of MP cost reductions to Prognosis, Eucrasian Prognosis, Eucrasian Diagnosis, and Eucrasian Prognosis 2. The Prognosis has gone from 800 to 700, and the rest have gone from 900 to 800. So Firstly, it seems like Square Enix has made an effort here to add more parity amongst the healers in terms of number 1, their damaging skills, number 2, the range of all of their actions has seemingly been as equalized as humanly possible. Their mana economies between the shield healers and the regen healers have made an effort at becoming normalized and having full parity with one another. And it seems like the real goal here is to make healers more interchangeable with one another, each having something small that makes them unique from one another. Sage actually has a better mana economy than Scholar now, even more so than ever before, because not only did their AoE heals go down to still be lower than Scholar's, but they still, once more, have better mana regeneration thanks to the Adder's Gall and Adder Sting mechanic. These two things combined make it a lot more customizable, adjustable, and flat out cheaper to use your AoE shields than it is on Scholar. The damage buff is nice as well, but Scholar is still just going to be ahead in most circumstances regardless of this. So we've taken a look at all of the tanks and healers now, let's move on to the melee DPS. When it comes to Dragoon actually got quite a few adjustments. First of all, Piercing Talon received buffs. It gains 50 potency from its trait, going from 150 to 200, and a new trait was added in general, which increases its potency to a whole whopping 350 after using Elusive Jump. As a little side note, there will actually be occasional applications where you will use this now. This isn't completely a failure state. This may be a button that you press based on phase timings in order to gain potency on the whole during a push. Now you also only get one use of Nestrond after pressing Gear Skogul, meaning that you lose 2 in total. This makes your burst windows a whole lot more lenient, a whole lot less intense, and unfortunately, in my opinion, a whole lot less interesting. The way I see it, after the various changes that Dragoon received in previous expansions, one of the key signifiers for Dragoon's unique placement was its fast, furious 2-minute window with a bunch of double weaves where you're unleashing Lestronds and you're unleashing life surges and you have a whole bunch of jumps, and that 2-minute window itself was one of the unique identifiers for Dragoon as a job. But now more and more space is being freed up. Mirage Dive went from 200 potency to 380 potency, Nestrond from 300 potency to 600 potency, Star Diver gains 100 potency going up to 720, Starcross receives increased range from 3 arms all the way up to 20, and the potency increases from 900 to 1000. But now, in terms of Dragoon's strength, this is very good. It now loses a whole lot less from peeling out of melee range for a GCD, thanks to the increased potency and the new trait attached to Piercing Talon. This is really good for the job actually, especially when so many of its direct competitors like Viper and Ninja have multiple options for peeling out of melee range without damage loss for multiple GCDs if they have to. Dragoon was falling behind in that regard, and they finally gained some ground so that they can stand in non-perfect situations for them. The Square Enix job design team had this to say about it. To help prevent DPS loss when it's necessary to keep distance from an enemy, we've increased the potency of Piercing Talon. An additional effect, further increasing its potency, has also been added to Elusive Jump. To reduce the number of actions executed during damage burst phases, players will no longer gain multiple stacks of Nestrond ready. Because this change greatly affects Dragoon's DPS, we've made further adjustments to other actions to maintain balance amongst melee DPS jobs. So this does maintain balance because what this ends up being is roughly a 1% damage buff on the whole for the job, and it actually puts Dragoon in a really good place in terms of the melee DPS balance charts. Dragoon benefits greatly from raid buff windows, and with these changes it's absolutely just a straight pumper. It's definitely one of the highest melee DPS out of the entire role. Whilst I think it probably feels worse to do with the new 2-minute windows, what it does do, which is a positive thing, is it provides additional leeway for getting your feints in, because before weaving a feint into your 2-minute windows without loss could actually be quite tricky and you would need to plan ahead, whereas now you're not going to have your Dragoon missing his feint because he's busy executing his burst. Moving on to Ninja, Throwing Dagger increases from 120 to 200 potency, Dream Within a Dream gains 30 to go up to 180, Dokumori has changed from a single target attack to a conal AoE instead, dealing 300 potency of damage to the first target and 225 to all the others. Also, you can now move whilst executing the Tenchi Jin Mudras, which is probably the biggest change here, and the hit detection for Tenri Jindo will trigger earlier. The development team had this to say about it. The effect of Tenchi Jin will no longer end upon moving, which we believe will improve its ease of use. Similarly, Dokumori has been changed to an area of effect attack. To help prevent DPS loss when it's necessary to keep distance from an enemy, we've increased the potency of Throwing Dagger. Please note, however, this change is meant only to supplement the use of ninjutsu, which allow ninjas to deal high damage at range. This is a 0.5% DPS buff roughly to the overall job. Ninja is looking very strong at the moment. It has good disengage options, it's easier to play than it was before, there are less annoyances like Dokumori and whiffing your TCJs, it has, once again, incredible disengage, it has a shield for itself, it has insanely high burst potential, and its overall DPS ceiling honestly probably is going to be the highest of the melee DPS as well when all things pan out. Samurai received a few changes as well. Hisatsu Gyoten had its recast time reduced from 10 to 5 seconds, Gyofu gains 10 potency going up to 240, Zanshin gains 80 going to 900, there was updated VFX for Tendo Kaishi Setsugeka, and all of this weighs out at again a 0.5% damage buff. I think personally, as a side note, that Samurai feels incredible to play since the 7.05 updates, which were not this patch, but I haven't actually spoken about them since they were implemented because they were implemented alongside the Savage release. It is my favourite melee to play, despite not really enjoying it in previous expansions. It is definitely more interesting than it was last expansion, even with the removal of Kaiten, thanks to the ability of you to carry burst over into your raid buffs. You can carry over the Madare and hold onto it for a period of time to use it whenever it works for you. And it feels really satisfying to manage that, hold onto it, build one up in preparation for your burst, and then unleash one before immediately going into another Madare. Feels really good to do that. And this feeds back into what I said about having decision making many times in regards to jobs. Samurai actually has more decision making than before as far as I'm concerned, and it's a very positive thing, and I really hope that it doesn't lose any of its newfound choice. Reaper received what are essentially only quality of life buffs, so I don't have too much to talk about here. Circle of Sacrifice from Arcane Circle now also grants stacks of Immortal Sacrifice when you or party members land a hit. There are hotbar fixes to the 3 reaping skills when Communio is ready to use. It just makes them not glow when you're not supposed to be using them so that it doesn't confuse players that aren't so experienced with the job. And lastly, Executioner's Gallows now gets better and quicker hit detection. Like I said, there are no real changes here aside from quality of life, and there is nothing to talk about. But with Machinist, we're moving on to the Fizz ranged here. Machinist gains a lot of damage buffs actually. Heated Clean Shot goes up from 140 to 160, meaning combo potency goes from 400 to 420. Blazing Shot gained another 20 potency as well, going to 240. Flamethrower got larger from 8 to 12 yards, and the potency increased 20 up to 100 for each tick. Double Check and Checkmate both went from 160 to 170. That's a whole lot of damage buffs, and it equals in total around about a 2.5% damage buff in total, which I believe is the largest damage buff that any DPS received this patch in total. 2.5%, whilst it sounds quite small, is actually pretty hefty in a game that has such relatively decent job balance like FF14. So, especially when you compare with like Dragoon gaining a 1% DPS buff, Machinist has more than double that and completely blows a 1% buff out of the water. But this has to be bought alongside the addendum that Machinist needed a lot more than any of the melee DPS. The Fizz range role in general is exceptionally weak and has some of the poorest balance in the game right now, with Bard just being such a good pick in most situations, and Machinist just being not very good of a pick in most situations. This damage buff is very good. It definitely helps shore up the gap between the Fizz range DPS, but Machinist is still the weakest. I think it'll still be the weakest Fizz ranged in almost every case, except Party Finder with a highly skilled player. And it's still a long way behind Bard, but this does make it feel much safer as a pick than it used to. It's good, but it needs more. When it comes to Dancer, the Fan Dance trait Dynamic Dancer now buffs potency from 150 to 180. Curing Waltz is bigger, going from 3 yarms to 5 yarms, and you'll see this is a theme here. Mitigation is getting bigger in size. Healing and tools like this are not only getting bigger in size, though they are also removing failure states and making it so that you press one of these mitigation buttons, you always see a positive effect. We can see that coming from the tank mitigations, both personal and raid, to the extended range on certain healer mitigations, to even right here Dancer's AoE heal gaining range to make it easier to use. Fan Dance 3 goes from 200 to 220 potency, and Starfall Dance and Devilment can now benefit from the action change setting system. This is a small damage buff. Status quo for physical range has mostly stayed the same. Bard is still the best in most cases, Machinist is still the worst in most cases, and Dancer kind of flip-flops around the middle, getting closer to Bard in certain situations, and dipping down to being a little bit ahead of Machinist in some cases. I still think both Dancer and Machinist would benefit from a small buff. One thing I do think though is that on fights that are awkward for Bard in terms of song timings, of which Ultimate has the highest chance to fulfill that, there is a world in which Dancer can pull ahead, which is good. Pictomancer only got quality of life buffs, which is a good thing because the job was bustedly strong before this. You now get all of your motifs automatically when spawning in after a wipe or into a new duty, and Starry Muse no longer appears when battle effects are limited. That's it. And for the record, the second change is bad and dumb. So if you use battle effects limited, you can no longer see your own Starry Muse. That's like not being able to see your ley lines. It makes no sense, and this needs to be reverted. It's okay for other players to not be able to see your Starry Muse. That's fine. But you should always be able to see your own. Please fix. Black Mage is very interesting, and we'll probably have a discussion about this after I've gone through each of the jobs. Firstly, Flare's cast time has been reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. Leylines now has 2 charges, which means in general, across an encounter, you just gain 1 Leylines for free, and you no longer lose as much from holding it due to mechanics. Despair is now an instant cast. Enhanced Enochian 4, on the other hand, received a damage nerf, going from a 33% damage buff on those skills to a 32% damage buff. So first of all, this does end up a damage gain, but secondly, Black Mage is more mobile than ever before, and these changes open up a non-standard rotation once more. There were some kind of shoddy, janky options for non-standard rotations in the 7.0 and 7.05 builds, but now there is a completely new non-standard rotation, which looks firstly very cursed, but secondly kind of interesting to do, and I will probably give it a go when I get a bit of time after Ultimate. This means that the gap between Pictomancer and Black Mage is closing, especially if you are optimally using your non-standard rotation. If we look at FF logs, the gap has closed a fair bit, especially at the highest percentiles. But I do not think this tells the full story. I do not think that right now Black Mage is as good as Pictomancer. Picto gains a lot of damage in downtime due to Muse painting, and it provides buffs as well as gaining more from party buffs. So it will likely pull further ahead in Ultimate. But despite this, these changes are good. They are not the Endwalker Black Mage that players know and loved, but it is something new, and it is more interesting than it was last patch. And I really hope that this form of Black Mage is satisfying to play, and is able to keep pumping damage, because Black Mage should be as strong as Pictomancer. So lastly, we move on to the res casters, Summoner and Red Mage. Summoner, interestingly, somehow managed to get easier. Crimson Strike is no longer locked as a combo off of Crimson Cyclone. Instead, you get a proc and you can use it later. all 3 primal summons gain potency, going from 750 to 800, and the reasoning for this, as a side note, is because of the previous bug that I talked about in regards to Scholar, where the potency of pet attacks, in that case Embrace, and in this case the summon of the pet themselves, were not doing the damage they were supposed to. So this is kind of a bug fix rather than just a flat out buff. On top of this, Sunflare goes from 700 to 800 potency. This ends up being roughly a 1% DPS buff on the whole, and it's not going to change Summoner's standings in any way, shape or form. It still has the position as the incredibly easy to play Rescaster that does acceptable damage, and that's really all it provides. It's just this patch, somehow it got easier. I personally don't feel that this change was necessary, but I'm sure some players will be very happy about it. When we move on to Red Mage received a small set of potency buffs, the Flare and the Holy gaining 30 potency going up to 650, Scorch and Resolution both gaining 50 potency and going up to 750 and 850 respectively. Small little damage buff. Once again, the positioning of Red Mage in the meta chart, or whether you would pick it and for what reasons, does not change at all with this, but of course there is no harm in jobs receiving extra damage, especially when they're not topping the charts like Red Mage and Summoner. So yeah, these are good changes. But the thing I really want to talk about after going through these is, what does all this mean? Were the changes good? Well, partly. There's a bit to unpack here. First, traditionally 0.1 patches are known as quality of life patches, where we get a number of excellent but often forgotten improvements to the flow of the game, menuing or UI options. This patch is no exception at all, even down to the job changes. Pictomancer no longer has to do their 3 individual paintings every time they zone in or respawn. Excellent change. Annoyances with healer AoE have been alleviated, and their mana efficiency has been improved. Extending the range of Philosophia and Divine Caress were both positive, because the fact they were shorter range in the first place compared to the majority of present day healer kits stuck out like a sore thumb. But there was a term thrown around a lot in the reasonings for specific changes. That term was ease of use. Like, of the 11 jobs that received an individual note from the job adjustment team on why changes had been made for them, the term ease of use shows up in 4 of them. Whilst ease of use absolutely makes sense and is a positive thing in regards to added quality of life, which was the reason provided for Isuna becoming an instant cast, and I do think where the term has been used for the most part, this is applicable. Paladin's cover range extension, Tenchi Jin's movement constraints being removed, and Gunbreaker's reduced double down ammo cost. The question must be raised as to whether jobs need more ease of use beyond quality of life changes. I want to play devil's advocate for a moment. Tenchi Jin, for example, was a job mechanic that was annoying for some, but it was fulfilling and satisfying to others. And more than that, it was a unique component of Ninja's kit. It has now been pruned. Double Down's unique ammo cost made you play around and plan around its usage, and acted as the linchpin of your rotation. It has now been pruned, because planning doesn't conform to ease of use. Beyond that, this patch, Summoner's Ifrit Gap Closer combo required you to use both actions in sequence, or you broke that combo. It was one of the few major points of friction in the entire rotation, and now it has been pruned. Black Mage has periods of time where it needs to plant and cast. That doesn't sound very easy to use now, does it? So, they changed it. Dragoon's burst window has a lot of button presses. So, they pruned the Nostrons. Is it really good to constantly cut every decision or point of friction? Is it really good to reduce casts per minute as much as possible? Is it really good for jobs to be pristine and clean, adorning wide plastic smiles, stripped of all imperfection and grit and personality? The real answer is, well, maybe? Yes and no. There are a lot of good reasons for jobs to get easier and easier. It makes more casual players have a better time on average, because executing your rotation feels good to do right, so making it easier increases the number of people that can feel those positive feelings. It has valuable positive connotations for players with physical or mobility-based disabilities, especially in regards to lowering CPM. This can even mean something literally like RSI being manageable for extended play sessions. Job depth being reduced allows them to go all in on fight design without needing to concern themselves too heavily with the unique constraints of individual jobs, because there are no unique constraints. Conversely, there's negative, too. Once you reach a level of mastery with one job, it cross-pollinates so cleanly and easily that you can replicate a similar level of mastery with the entire role with very little effort investment. This did not used to be the case. So you have less to learn and less to attain in general. Removing unique points of friction like the TCJ route feed into that, and many changes made across the last few expansions do as well. Jobs don't feel as rewarding either because that level of attainment is simply less than it was before. When complexity is hinged so heavily on encounter design due to shallower jobs, easy content becomes less fun, repeat clears become less engaging, and fights that aren't as enjoyable become a painful experience very quickly. It helps the floor, but it hurts the ceiling. Neither of those things are inherently bad, honestly, but a middle ground can, and as far as I'm concerned personally, should be found. In the early days of Dawntrail, even pre-release, it was stated that job design philosophy will see more sweeping changes in the future, with the expectation that we'll see the fruits of that labour around about 8.0, at least the start of it. I guess my concern here is that even in 7.1, with a stated shift in mentality to jobs on the horizon, we're still moving more and more in a clear and committed direction towards making job moment-to-moment decision-making as simple and thoughtless as possible. Does that mean this future direction is in fact not a middle ground, but rather to streamline even further instead? You could argue that in the case of Dragoon, for example, freeing up those button presses within burst windows is actually a great thing because it opens up real estate within the rotation for future editions in 8.0. But if that's the case, why were they made now? Why not make them closer to 8.0, instead of leaving us a feeling of emptiness for the next 4 major patches? And more than that, why isn't Stronged the victim instead of that second life surge stack that I don't think anybody likes? Game feel aside, I do believe this balancing patch made positive strides in positioning potential usurpers to Pictomancer's throne in the future. Ninja's buffs are really nice, and in a full uptime encounter with nice 2-minute buff windows it can really pump. Black Mage 2 is finally in a pretty great spot in terms of their damage output, and I have a feeling that they too might become interchangeable with Pictomancer soon enough, where Picto gains an advantage the moment there is a little downtime, and Black Mage can pull ahead in full uptime scenarios when played well using the new non-standard rotation. Dragoon is another big winner here numbers-wise as well. So yeah, if we take the patch job adjustments as a collective, I think it's a mixed bag. Great quality of life changes, balance and fixes for some roles, but further divides being rifted between others. Some jobs becoming more interesting, others becoming less. It reminds me of the uncertainty we faced looking on to a brand new saga for the game just a few months ago. Could they really catch lightning in a bottle once again? Are we hoping for that which is impossible? Only time will tell. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.